So Virtua Cop 2 is a sequel to the game I previously reviewed, and it came out only a year later. Given the short amount of time between the two games, they have a lot in common, especially in terms of game mechanics. Because of this, I want to focus this review on the differences between Virtua Cop 1 and Virtua Cop 2. The most apparent change between the two games is an update to the graphical fidelity of Virtua Cop 2. This comes in the form of an increase in the detail and resolution of the texture work done on the 3D models. You'll notice building sides have a little more edging stenciled in, brick textures, signs that are a little sharper, and even small details like the targeting reticle on bad guys. In Virtua Cop 1, this was a solid circle with a couple wedges that went around the perimeter of the circle. But in Virtua Cop 2, you have this kind of double circle design where you got like a small circle and a larger circle outside of it, and lines bridging the two, and it gives it a much more mechanical look. And even as the reticle zooms in, you get this double circle effect that aligns itself to make the single sight. These little changes and updates give the game something more interesting to look at. The little details like this make the game look much less like an early release title and really help it kind of set its own visual tone, kind of come into its own and stand on its own. In addition to the graphical changes, the difficulty is also ramped up. As I had mentioned in my Virtua Cop 1 review, Virtua Cop tends to be a very approachable light gun shooter. It highlights enemies, the tropes that they follow are very predictable, and once you ramp up to how Virtua Cop works, that you understand the light gun language, and you can take that over to games like House of the Dead or Time Crisis. Virtua Cop 2 takes away some of the niceties that gave a very shallow difficulty ramp for Virtua Cop 1. The first thing I had noticed was an increase in the number of enemy fake-outs. The idea of having multiple enemies pop up but only one of them be attacking you, or enemies popping up in multiple areas of the level all shouting to try to get my attention but then only one of them actually deciding they're going to fire. This became a problem for me because I tend to really focus on my light gun games when I'm playing them. The intent being I'm trying to react quickly and memorize the levels. So the idea of having enemies repeatedly shout out and pop around does a very good job of distracting me, of pulling my gun sight away from the real threat. And there's even moments in the game where multiple enemies are all crowding the screen at the same time and it's hard to tell which one's the one's firing, and at that point you really have to trust the targeting reticle. In addition, while power-ups are still a mechanic in Virtua Cop 2, the number of them has been reduced. No longer do you as often get a power-up in the middle of a level to help clear a certain wave of enemies or make the level easier. Instead, power-ups are positioned really just before boss fights. There's enough time between the power-up and the boss fight that it's a challenge to hold on to the weapon, as if you take any single point of damage, you lose the power-up, but you always get in about the third act of the level, so you don't get that benefit throughout the whole duration. But if you do manage to hold on to the power-up until the boss fight itself becomes easier. These two changes alone turned a game that would take me 2 playthroughs to beat into a game that took me about 6 or 7 playthroughs to memorize and understand and sharpen my skills enough to actually complete. Virtua Cop 2 also tries to make itself a much larger feeling game. Levels span more locations. The first level, for example, you start at a jewelry store as it's getting robbed, and after you deal with the robbers there, you hop in your car and you drive around the streets of the city, you stop at what appears to be an apartment complex, do some fighting there, and then get in and drive again to a construction site. The whole time having this sort of seamless camera movement going around. And this is a pattern that's followed in all 3 of the stages. The idea is you're no longer going to a single location and having your series of shootouts and entering a building and fighting a boss, which was the pattern in the first game, but rather you're traversing several areas in the city, whether it be a train or a car. These made the levels feel much longer and also made the world feel much larger. In addition, levels also offered branching paths. This would make repeat plays much more interesting. One playthrough you could decide, I'm going to go ahead and take Seaside Drive in order to get to the construction site. Another playthrough you decide, I'm going to go downtown. The levels are different, the enemy placements are different when going these different routes. It adds more to the game. It helps it breathe better, feel more like a world. And that ultimately seemed to be the goal of Virtua Cop 2, is make Virtua City into a breathing world and not just a shooting gallery. The increased production quality of the game also comes through in a lot of little details in the presentation of the game. One example being that there's intros that are voiced going into each level. Usually it's just the main character saying, okay, let's go. But the third level, they have a little more voice to weave some narrative into the level and help to stitch these levels together. They're no longer separate isolated shooting galleries, but they're episodes in this tale about these cops trying to fight these terrorists. On the main menu screen, you get this voiceover that just says Virtua Cop 2, something you would expect to hear in a lot of arcade games. And just the existence of that makes the game feel like a higher quality product. It's not some static, quiet screen. When playing the game, there seems to be a greater variety in civilians. You have female civilians, male civilians, civilians that work on a cruise ship, civilians wearing suits. You have many different voices used for the civilians. And this again lended itself to higher production quality, bigger world, weaving the story together. And overall, I would say that's really the tale of Virtua Cop 2. At its core, it's the same game as Virtua Cop 1. However, I don't think it's a game that you should play before Virtua Cop 1. I think the change in difficulty suggests that Virtua Cop 1 is a good introductory title still, and the increased production value I think may spoil some players when playing Virtua Cop 2 and then going back and playing the first one. You kind of have to have an open mind in order to enjoy both of them in that reverse order. That being said, Virtua Cop 2 is still a fantastic game. I had a lot of fun with it. It's stressful. It really made me step up my light gun shooting game. It really made me think about how I was playing, how I was deciding when to shoot, how to hold the gun itself. Virtua Cop 1 is much more relaxed, and it was all about just playing the game, and like I said, in 2 playthroughs I beat it, so there wasn't a lot of memorization happening. But in the second game, I was thinking more about how am I gripping this controller, how tight am I gripping it to increase the accuracy of my aim so it's not just floating loose. Will I try to trend my sight up a little bit into certain sections of the game because of the way cover's laid out? Will I wait a little longer before pulling the trigger in certain areas because I know there's a lot of hostages coming up? These small details became more important, and it felt more like an arcade game because of that. I was doing a lot of these micro optimizations to give myself as much buffer in my lives and credits as possible so I could ultimately make it to the last bosses and beat them. So I would highly suggest playing both Virtua Cop 1 and 2. Play them back to back because they're not that long and light gun games are fun. Thanks for listening as always, and I'll see you guys next time.